Hello everyone, it's Monday the 14th of September and this is episode 87 of the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, your host, Ben Eagle. We're going to dive straight in this week for a change. My guest today is Sally Urwin, who is a Northumbrian farmer. It's Farmer Focus. Now, it's not often I say this on this show, but I first came across my guest tonight when I was reading her book. Sally Urwin and her husband Steve run a high house farm in Northumberland, farming sheep, chickens and arable crops. They also run a wedding venue and a microbrewery, and they both have off-farm jobs, so they're both incredibly busy people. She describes herself on Twitter as a very short farmer's wife living in Northumberland. She's the author of A Farmer's Diary, A Year at High House Farm. Sally, thanks so much for coming on the show. It's a real privilege to have you here. I always find it strange when you read a book and then you meet the person.
I know what you mean. Well, thank you for having me. Yes.
Can we start with the book actually?
Yeah, of course.
In terms of why you decided to write it, and have you always been a diarist? Because it's sort of set in diary entry form.
Yeah. Well, I'd had a blog for about 3 years, and I'd been, and it was basically just for friends and family because I'm not from a farming background, and they said lots of things struck me as funny, so I'd write these blog posts. And then I discovered Twitter, and I love Twitter, and I had a lovely time on there. And then one day I got an email from a publisher in London who said, "Hello, would you like to write a book for us?" And I was like, this must be a scam, you know. So I went down to my local bookshop and said, "Have you heard of these publishers, profile publishers?" And they said, "You must ring them back." So I did, and they offered me a book contract. And they wanted it in a diary format because that was the sort of format they wanted going forward.
Yep.
And yeah, it was a complete surprise, a lovely surprise.
Tell us about your part of Northumberland and the farm itself.
Well, we're a little farm. We're only 150 acres, and we are about 25 minutes from Newcastle. So we're not like out in the middle of nowhere.
Okay.
Yeah,
right.
And we're 3 miles from Hadrian's Wall, but it's quite flat. It's not like we're not up on the tops. It's still quite in by sort of a lowland farm. And we're a mixed farm. We have sheep and crops. And also we diversified, and we have a brewery and a tea room and a wedding venue and glamping sites and all those kind of things too.
Yeah.
So we're busy.
But clearly you're not from a farming background yourself, but I'm still interested in your life growing up and how you got to where you are. So tell me about your early life.
I went to a school in Newcastle. I've got no connections with farming at all. And I went to Durham University to do a history degree. So I was sort of funneled into the corporate world. And of course, everybody was doing it. It was that era where people said you can do whatever you want to do, you should go for it. So I found myself doing corporate marketing for some of the most boring firms in the world, really desperate. And I worked in Bristol and London and all these sorts of places. And I just hated it. It wasn't me at all. I wasn't resilient enough. I could do the presentations and stuff, but it just seemed like a huge waste of time. And I ended up, it was such a desperate job. I ended up marketing a firm of insolvency practitioners in Leeds.
Wow.
A huge accountancy firm.
Okay.
And it was so depressing because basically I was marketing these poor souls who'd gone bankrupt or marketing our services to them. And one day I thought, I'm almost 30. What am I doing? Yeah. So I decided I would move to the countryside, and I got a horse, and then I decided to go on Dating Direct, you see.
Okay. Yep.
So this was the early 2000s.
Yeah.
It was just the beginning of online dating. And in those days, I'm sure you could say whether you wanted your partner to be in the city or rural and exactly what height you wanted them. So I said under 5'8" because I'm so titchy, and rural based. And I think about 3 people popped up near me, and one of them was Steve.
Okay.
And yeah, that was it.
Yeah. You mentioned it in the book, but tell me about your first date together.
Well, it was actually my second date because we went out to the pub to make sure that he wasn't a serial killer all the time. My dad actually came and picked me up from that date. That was very embarrassing. But then the second date, of course, he was in the middle of lambing.
Yeah.
So he said, come on over to the farm. And I didn't even have a pair of wellies. And I just loved it. And the first day he had me picking up lambs and trying to get the ewes in. But of course, I didn't know which lambs belonged to which mother. So I think he shouted at me a couple of times because, when you're tired and I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I didn't even know the difference between hay and straw.
Yeah.
So he had to teach me everything. So it was a very, very steep learning curve. Yeah. He still shouts at me in the lambing shed.
From the early days when you started getting to know the farm, how has it changed since I suppose you started there, and what influence do you think you've had?
Well, when I started, Steve was quite isolated, I suppose. I mean, he'd started up this microbrewery because he had to diversify. It was just after foot and mouth. And for such a small farm, we weren't killed out, but for such a small farm, he had to do something for some more income. So he'd started up the real ale brewery, and I came in. And my background was marketing.
Yep.
So I started doing that for him. And I had visions, as somebody coming into the industry, you have visions of yourself in like Bowden clothes and having a beautiful picnic on a stubble field with like matching tableware. And it's really not like that. It's not like that. And so that was quite an eye opener for me. And I suppose I made him more, I don't know, I wouldn't say broaden his horizons, but I introduced him to more people. And because he didn't have a background in marketing, but he had to sell a beer, so I helped with that. So yeah, and diversifying. I think marketing skills are useful for diversifying going forwards.
Yeah, big time.
So I hope I've changed it for the better. I don't know. I hope so.
And clearly, you are doing a lot, which is a common thing for farmers. But there's lots of different enterprises. Your time is really, really pushed, and that can be quite stressful. How do you balance things, and how much of a challenge do you find that?
Well, at first, you see, so we were running the brewery, and after about 3 years, we expanded it to do a wedding venue, and eventually we sold that business, but they're still in the farm buildings.
Right, okay.
Because we just didn't have enough time, because the weddings go on till 2 a.m, and it was getting ridiculous. So everything that we've done, farming is really the core, so that always comes first. We've rented off a field to a lovely company called Dark Sky Glamping, so they're doing that. Okay. So other people are in the farm and doing a lot of the work. But yeah, it is. And juggling kids, I had 2 kids in 5 years. It is really stressful. 40 years ago, I think there were like 3 people, 4 people working on the farm. And now there's Steve and me.
Yeah.
So
doing probably arguably even more work.
Yeah, and the jobs list, nothing is going to be done as it was. The buildings aren't painted and fences aren't done as quickly, and it's just like a huge to-do list. But because we're so small, we can't afford to employ anybody else. So you've just got to like knuckle down.
Take me back to your first lambing. Was it what you expected?
No, I thought it would be, I don't know, little fluffy bundles. I remember when the first lamb came out and I was in tears going, it's so beautiful, wonderful of nature. Wonderful. He was like, oh, for God's sake. So I had this like fluffy version of what it was. And of course, getting your hand in there and pulling them out. But I didn't mind it. I enjoyed taking these tiny scraps. And Steve would give me all the pet lambs, the cage lambs, and I would go and feed them. And that's what I'm good at. And I've got tiny hands as well, so I'm quite good at lambing like that. Yeah.
Always helpful.
But being little is not a great thing on a farm because everything is designed for tall, beefy men. I mean, even things like sheep hurdles, I have to physically climb over them, and it's knackering. Yeah. Quad bikes, I have to use an automatic because I can't reach the clutch.
Yep.
The Yorkshire Shepherdess, lovely lady, she's 6'2". She doesn't have trouble on quad bikes. I can't even wear, we call them bib and braces, dungarees, because the top of the dungarees is sort of like near my eyebrows. There's all these things that people don't think about if you're a short woman or man, because 4'10" is really quite titchy. So that's where it all came from. I found that very funny, sort of telling people how, how a sheep now is really quite big. It's up to my waist, so they knock me over, and you've got to think of other ways of doing stuff.
They can be strong. They can
They
definitely be
can,
strong.
especially Texels, Texel mule crossers. They're big.
They are. I want to take you back to the book for a bit. You're very explicit, really, in the book about the challenges that you face on the farm and the realities behind it. Let's go. So this is 19th of September. I'm quoting here. We can't afford many sheep today. Farming is going through a slump. We've already borrowed money for new farm equipment to replace some that desperately need replacing, and we're still paying the mortgage for the farm diversification into the brewery. It's always a juggling act, as, like most small farmers, our fields and stock aren't extensive enough to cover costs as well as bring in a living wage. Do you find that frustrating? With the amount of work involved and aspirations as well, because certainly in this game you do want to be at the top of what you can actually possibly do in each of those enterprises, but your time is really, really pushed.
I do. It does frustrate me a lot. You can see, because I'm getting quite. And when I see how hard Steve works, and then how little it actually brings into his pocket, that's really hard. I mean, we work as hard as, my brother's a GP, and I wouldn't for one minute say that, that our risks are as bad as his. But my husband works as hard as a GP, but of course he doesn't have the income coming in. So I don't know. I don't know what the solution is. I haven't been in the industry long enough to know that, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think if anyone does know the solution, then please tell us, because
please tell us, because small family farms are a dying breed. I do think that anything less than about 200 acres, it's very, very difficult to make a living from it.
Yeah.
And of course, my kids, my daughter's quite keen on farming, but I have to say to her, you need another career, because unfortunately, the way things are going, it's not going to provide a living wage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember when the dairy went under here. This is early 2000s, so I was sort of an early teen, and I definitely grew up with both my parents saying, "Don't go into agriculture." I mean, that was a particularly tough time for the industry, and I mean, not that now isn't as well. It's
exactly, but it was. It's a particularly tough time, wasn't it? And Steve was told, go to university, but he loves farming. He's like, we've worked out, I'm one of those really boring family history people, and we worked out he's like 8th generation farmer. It's in his blood. Yeah. So
and that really counts for something.
Yeah, it does. It
really
does. And he loves it, and he knows the land, and he's a very good farmer. I just wish we had more income from it.
Because of this situation, really, you have to do off-farm work as well. Something you asked to talk about is the pressure. I thought this was a really interesting one, actually. The pressure felt by a lot of farmers' wives, or farmers' partners generally, to work off the farm and on the farm, as well as looking after the kids and managing the house, etc., etc., etc. How do you manage with that?
Yeah, this was something that struck me, and I carefully crafted that to include all genders, wives, husbands, whatever, partners. The older generation, I think, and this is a very sweeping generalization, the farmer's wife was expected to help on the farm, look after the children, manage the house. Now coming into farming, people often need another career if they're a partner to a farmer. So you end up having to do your tasks on the farm, especially during lambing and harvest. You've got your own career to bring money in. You're looking after the kids because your partner's 24/7 on the farm, and you're trying to keep your house in a semblance of order. And I don't know how people do it. I was trying to think when my kids were small, and I remember one day I had no childcare, and I was in the middle of lambing, so I had to put my youngest. I put him in a cardboard box in the middle of the sheep feeder. Right, he was little. Please don't call child services on me. He's absolutely fine. And gave him a biscuit. And he sat there and he was quite happy, but I had no other option. And I would have to go and check the sheep, but my child was too small to sit on the quad bike. So what I did was I put him on the old farm pony and walked all the way around. It's really tough.
Yeah.
And I don't think, because a lot of the older generation, their wives didn't work, their partners didn't work. So maybe they don't understand how hard it is to juggle everything. I
Yeah.
don't think you can have it all. I really
Yeah.
don't. And somebody said to me, she said, well, it's conditioning. You know, you don't need a job and you should be happy. And I said, I do need a job because the kids are on free school meals. I need to afford anything. Of course you do, because you need to eat.
Yeah.
So that sort of shut her up for a bit. But I think if you're coming into, like, if you're a non-farmer and you come into a farming family, say a family farm, it can be very difficult to be able to stand up for yourself and say, no, I'm not doing that because I've done a 12-hour shift here. And I know the farmer's wife always looked after the pet lambs, but I'm knackered. I'm not going to do it, you know?
Yeah. So again, going back to the book, I really love how open you are with your situation as it develops through. And I know you said that it was sort of an amalgamation of 3 years into one. But there's one particular point when you come with the help of the RBI, the Royal
Oh yeah, they're
Agricultural
great
Benevolent Institution.
organization. Yeah.
And actually, I wanted to read out that section because I think you put it really well. Because this is, I think there has been, and the farming press, etc., have been really a lot better. And generally, social media, we've been better about talking about mental health in the farming circles. But I still think when you actually go through the realities of it, and that's why I wanted to read this section. So you describe this is the 3rd of June. Poor grass growth, big heating bills, and no money coming in from crops or sheep has pushed many local farmers to the brink. In desperation, we ring the ROBI. It's embarrassing to have to ask for help, but we're not sure what else to do. The nice man at the end of the helpline asks lots of questions. He tells us that mental health in farmers is at an all-time low, and he has personally spoken to a lot of people in agriculture who are finding it hard to make ends meet. This makes us feel better knowing that we're not the only ones. Why do you think it's so important that organisations like the ROBI exist?
They are such an important organisation. They were so nice to us when we were really quite desperate, because there's sort of like a culture of silence, of embarrassment in farming about not having money and having all of these stresses, and you're supposed to be sort of stoic and just get on with it. And I think it leads to really serious mental health problems. So I was really keen to put that in the book. And I spoke to Steve about it and I said, shall I do this? And I know some comments we did have was like, you don't wash your dirty linen in public. You don't tell people your problems.
Yeah.
But I thought, if somebody else is going through this and they can't afford to buy the kids shoes, or they can't afford because the weather's been so awful, then you know, you need to know that there's other people living it as well, and have got out the other side. The man at Rabbi was lovely, and I think I sobbed at him. I think I sobbed at him on his jacket for quite a bit, and he was really good, and he was very sort of discreet. And they gave us help with our household bills because, that was the year that it was such a terrible lambing, I remember, and the weather was so dreadful, and we just
when was that roughly?
So that was, can you remember the awful storm in?
Yeah,
was it Boxing Day 2000 and something? Was it 16 or so? I can't remember anyway. It was
16
something
or
like
17,
that.
something like that.
And it was just, you know, we were up to the wire really, and they were super. And I would say to anybody, if you're having trouble and you're really worried, then to speak to them. And he actually did say to me, because I've always been quite open about mental health and, you know, what the struggles we've had, and he said there are so many people that are struggling with it, especially the older generation that don't want to talk about it, that feel it's embarrassing.
Yeah, hugely. When I was reading your book, actually, incidentally, this is only last year, last lambing. I went through a really bad time. Actually, it was leading towards that, but around about April, May last year, things just ran away with me, and I got to a really, really dark place. And again, that's something that I'm really, that I really admire for you in the book as well. I've got another quote here as well, because you're very open about having, when you have a bad day, it's a bad.
I have a bad day,
and it's a bad day. So second of June here. Yeah, my anxiety is so bad that I'm finding it hard to get out of bed, let alone leave the house. I carry around a feeling of impending disaster, and tiny setbacks make me burst into tears. Eventually, Steve persuades me to see the doctors, and after an appointment with the local surgery, I come back with some antidepressants, some new antidepressants, and a recommendation for mindfulness and more exercise. How long have you suffered with anxiety?
Since I was a little girl, it's something, I think it's genetic, and I've been on antidepressants since I was 25,
Okay.
and I have generalized anxiety disorder. I don't really get depressed. I just get very, very, very anxious. I had postnatal depression. So it's something I'm very familiar with, and I've got this range of things to cope with it. But when you're down, when you were talking about having a very low time, you sort of, it's like you have no distance from your problems, and you go in a very tight circle, and you can't see a way out, and everything seems very bleak. To people looking into your situation, there's lots of ways that you can help yourself, but because you're so down, you can't see them.
Yeah.
So really, even, I mean, the NHS is so stretched at the moment, but even going to talk to somebody and saying, this is how I feel, and having somebody else's input is massively helpful.
Yeah.
But I'm not one of these that says you have to, I don't know, meditate and knit your own yogurt and stuff. Take the tablets. Take the tablets. Do your exercise. I'm not doing any exercise. I really need to do exercise. You do running, don't you? You're a runner.
That's one for me. That's again, it's something that I have to do. There are certain things. If I do these certain things, then I keep fine.
Exactly.
And if I notice as well, because you can tell signs, I will tell someone straight away.
And it's so common. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. It's just like another illness. But you're right. You have a range of sort of coping mechanisms. But I'm quite down to earth, so I can't ever see myself coming off antidepressants. I can't. I will always have this. But it has its plus sides. It means tiny pluses. It means that you're sort of, is that a word? Empathic.
Yeah.
To other people.
Big
you
time.
might be more sensitive. My doctor told me only the best people get anxiety and depression.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
I believe her. Yeah,
definitely.
So there you
go. You mentioned that you've used Twitter for quite a while.
I love
do you
it.
find? Yeah, I was going to say, do you find social media a useful thing? I suppose from a business point of view, but also a personal point of view, or does it have negative sides for you as well?
You get some strange people. I don't get weird
definitely do.
direct messages. I get people who have an allotment and want to tell me about their turnips and stuff. I don't get like anything weird or dodgy pictures. Obviously not that demographic. When I first joined here, I joined a farming family. I didn't know any other farmers' wives, and I still don't really. Maybe they're all hiding under the table somewhere. I don't know. So Twitter for me, being quite isolated, was wonderful, and it suits my sense of humour. I've met some brilliant people on that. We've met up in real life as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, it does have some great points. I tend to avoid the drama. I don't engage with people that are, although on bad days I get terribly angry and go and try and, Stephen's like, you're shouting at Twitter again. I'm like, yeah, I'll go outside, So definitely, I don't like Facebook because it's full of relatives. But Twitter, I love my relatives, but Twitter and Instagram to a lesser extent. Yeah, I love them. You like them as well, obviously. You do quite a bit of interaction on there.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I'm definitely not as active as a lot of the people that probably you and I know are the most active people on Twitter. But I find it really, really useful just as a way of reaching out and seeing what other people are doing and just connecting. And it is a brilliant tool.
And whatever you say you've had a crappy day and something's died, and you go on and say something, this has happened. It's happened to somebody else.
Yeah.
So you're not alone, which is
exactly.
really, really helpful.
No, definitely. Let's turn towards your diversifications and how they started. So you mentioned that the brewery Steve started before you came on the farm. Mm-hmm. Why did he decide to focus on that?
I think the advice was to either do self-catering, or he didn't want to sell it for buildings, for houses, because you've got some lovely sort of grade 2 listed buildings. And that was just at the beginning of the microbrewery boom.
Yeah.
So he went and did a course and did that, and it worked really well. The market is quite saturated now with microbreweries, and I think you need another income behind you, or to be a wonderful salesperson to succeed. But it did well, and it brought in an income. And then, of course, the rest of our buildings, they were just lying empty. We didn't use them because they weren't suited for today's farming. So we turned that into a tea room, and that was eye-opening because we had to deal with the general public. And I'd often have to push Steve into the office because he's not the most tactful man in the world.
Right. Okay.
Whilst dealing with like huge coach parties but it was fun,
Yeah.
it was good, and you met lots of different people. So then we did that, then we sold that business, and then we decided that we would make more money renting a field out to glamping company, which seems to have gone really well.
Brilliant.
And then the book, I suppose, was another diversification. So there's and
Yeah.
now we're going to open a high welfare pig unit. That's what we're going to do next.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Wow.
Now I don't know much about it, so don't ask me any questions. But that's
okay,
what
I
what we're
won't.
going to do.
That's great.
Steve's domain, yeah. So we're constantly looking at the next thing to bring in some money.
Fantastic.
Yeah. We worked out we'd be able to retire when we're like 72, but I reckon I'll be about 3 foot high.
To be honest, that's good.
Yeah, I know. I have this horrible feeling. I'm still going to be like feeding pet lambs when I'm 90, probably.
Yeah, most family farmers never retire, I think.
Exactly.
You mentioned when you were writing the book, certainly the section on Rabbi, you talked with Steve about before. Were there any particular sections in the book that were difficult to write or were particularly memorable to write? Maybe some of the funnier bits?
Yeah, I love writing about the animals. That's the bit I like writing about. So we've got an assortment of threadbare animals like Scabby the lamb, and Steve's mortified by it because he's a rough, tough Northumbrian farmer, and you don't name your sheep. It's embarrassing, isn't it? So we've got a fat pony, and we've got all these hopeless-looking animals. So I love that. Oh, I love writing about my dad as well, my family. I find them very, very funny too.
That's very clear when you're reading it as well. Yeah.
The time that Dad and I went to a diet club, and it was absolutely true, word for word, and it made me howl. So yes, he's a great. Sorry, Dad, but he's a great sort of inspiration for comedy as Dad. I find it tricky, I suppose, writing about the bad times. Lambing. I was writing about when the weather was really, really bad. And I think Steve and I had a massive argument in the middle of the car park, and the rain was going sideways and something had just died. And yeah. And when the little tiny lambs, die as well, that's really bad. Yeah. When Button died.
Yeah. JD, it's like, what's the best thing about your farming life, do you think?
I suppose the variety. After I've written the book, I do a lot of book tours. I was taking lambs around wearing nappies, which Steve again was mortifying. So that's fun, and I like meeting people. I like talking to people, so I love going to the mart, and it's because I suppose I see everything with a new eye. I'm not from the industry, and then some days I'm just working with sheep. Some days I'm working on my other job, and then other days I'm writing.
Yeah, and
we just live in such a beautiful area. Lots of visitors that you might get this as well. Lots of visitors that come to the farm say, I would love to live here. Your lifestyle must be amazing. And I always go, well, it's not that great, when the weather's bad and, but it is, isn't it? It's lovely to like see the seasons and the wildlife and the nature. So that's what I enjoy as well. I've always been very country. Yeah. I didn't enjoy living in a city.
We always finish the show with the same two questions. The first one is, if you had a message for the public, one message, what would it be and why?
Put your dog on a lead. On a lead.
Good one.
We have a footpath running through our farm. Love the general public. They're great. There's one or two that say to me, my Labradors are really well trained. They're not going to chase anything. It's rubbish. Please put them on a lead. That's the main thing. Enjoy our farm. Enjoy yourself. Put your dogs on a lead.
Brilliant. And a message for farmers?
I suppose it might, sometimes if you're very down, it might seem that you're the only one with the particular problem, but I promise you it's not. And you've got to talk to somebody, I think, if you're feeling low, and don't be embarrassed. Let it all out. Yeah, I have. So just tell people and then you'll feel better.
Brilliant. Well, Sally, It's been a real pleasure to meet you. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
That's all right,
and
Ben.
Everyone, please buy the book. It's yeah. Where can people? Where's the best place for people to get it?
They can buy it anywhere. Amazon. It's actually the paperback's out now. It's just been published in America. It's called Pint-Sized, A Diary of a Pint-Sized Farmer. To Amazon, independent bookshops, wherever you'd like.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
It's Farmer Focus.
Sally Urwin, who you can follow on Twitter at Pint-Sized Farmer. That's all we have time for today, but thank you very much for listening. I hope you can join me next time when we'll be talking all things Bayer with Mark Buckingham. Until then, have a great week and I'll see you next time.